Good morning, everyone, and welcome. One of the nice things about a virtual conference is the opportunity for people to participate from just about anywhere. For example, I'm joining you today from the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. In that context, I would encourage each of you to also reflect on the land on which you are currently situated. But since this conference is, at least in spirit, situated in downtown Toronto, let us together acknowledge that Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. The dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them together to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect.
Thank you, Tina. And welcome everybody to our second day of the Learning and Teaching Conference. For those of you who were able to join us yesterday, I hope you found inspiration from our keynote and our many concurrent sessions as I did. To start our day off today, I'd like to welcome Dr. Saeed Zulfagari, Interim Provost and Vice President Academic, to share opening remarks for our second day.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you all of you for having me at this year's Learning and Teaching Conference. I'm very pleased to celebrate your remote learning and teaching successes, as well as to acknowledge the resilience and innovative approaches you have developed over the past year. This year's conference theme, Partners in Learning, speaks to the importance of collaboration, as well as the innovation, boldness, and talents of Ryerson's teaching community. It also sets the stage for the resources and thought leadership that is available at the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching. Since the launch of the Teaching Center, the classrooms of the future has been taking shape. From expanding our existing teaching resources to supporting the move to remote learning, the Teaching Center has been vital in creating more opportunities for us to learn together. Amidst the pandemic, the Teaching Center's collaborative and holistic approach is more important than ever. Continuously examining our core beliefs about pedagogy is crucial for supporting and enhancing the student's experience. And above all, we must continue to create equitable, accessible, diverse, and inspiring learning environment. Today's conference program, which features the student perspective on remote learning, as well as how to foster truth, understanding, and respect among Indigenous and non-Indigenous community members at Ryerson, is a testament to our commitment to enrich our programming and to adapt in the face of adversity. The strong foundation we are building and the skills we are developing will set up our students for continued success over the next academic year, post-pandemic and beyond. Thank you again for participating in today's conference. I'm eager to hear more of your learning and teaching insights from the past year and look forward to supporting your incredibly valuable work. Thank you.
Thank you, Saeed. This May, we mark two important milestones in teaching development at Ryerson. The University Teaching Development Program, or the UTDP, has been a core program for developing teaching practice at Ryerson for many years. Over the past year at the center, we've been re-envisioning teaching development with many rich opportunities for members of the Ryerson teaching community to advance their skills, knowledge, and teaching practice. New programming will be announced soon. Most importantly, we take this opportunity to thank Dr. Gosha Zhivno for her many years as Faculty Associate of the Learning and Teaching Office and the Center, Champion of Teaching Development at Ryerson, and leader of the UTDP program. No one at Ryerson has given so much of themselves, their experience and expertise to developing and mentoring those who teach at Ryerson over the years. At the core of any new teaching development initiatives will be the many lessons we've learned from Gosha about the importance of peers, community, and commitment to students. We look forward to continuing to learn from Gosha and the many that she has mentored. We take this opportunity to thank Gosha for her extraordinary contribution to teaching at Ryerson.
The program, in a nutshell, is how to become the best version of the professor that you have within you, and how to learn from the best at Ryerson and outside of Ryerson.
I'd only had really a couple courses under my belt, and so I was really interested in getting a better understanding of some teaching pedagogies.
It was wonderful to have a guided process to go through.
So the program really includes a series of workshops and guest lectures and speaker series that tackle the issues like active learning, experiential learning, scaffolding.
The activities that we did, we actually learned by doing in the class.
The program is sort of meta in that what you do in the program represents how you should teach also.
One of the things I think that was really interesting was that there were people from all over the university.
We were able to know each other really well. We saw each other weekly. We knew each other's names. We participated in various activities together, and we could share and discuss our successes and challenges with what we were experiencing.
You come out of the program with a sort of support network for the most important years of your teaching.
Congratulations to all the participants and recent graduates for taking this step in advancing your teaching.
Congratulations to the UTDP graduates. The University Teaching Development Program is a big commitment. It's intensive, it's transformative, and you should be very proud of all that you've accomplished throughout the program.
I would like to congratulate all the people that graduated recently, and of course everybody who graduated before as well. This is not a small accomplishment. For me, UTDP was always about the community of learners, creating the community, supporting each other. Honestly, this is the highlight of my career at Ryerson.
Gosha would set up a coffee meeting with every single person. That sort of one-on-one time was really helpful in terms of giving me the confidence in terms of what I was trying to do. Her contribution had a huge impact on my journey.
She has this ability to create a safe environment for learning, but make you feel very uncomfortable at the same time.
I know if I ever have a question, I can go to Gosha and ask her about something.
Thank you so much for just being so inspiring, for being you, for sharing so openly everything that you gave to us.
Ever since I took the UTDP, everything academic related has just been on this amazing trajectory. So I have you to thank for that contribution in my life.
Gosha, we've known each other for a long time, and I'd like to thank you for sharing your passion for teaching and, as always, your focus on student learning.
Gosha, I want to say a huge thank you to you. You've been such a champion and advocate for the program and its participants. And as a result, how you've impacted thousands of students on campus every year.
Thank you, Gosha, to sharing your knowledge and expertise with us.
I really appreciate all the time that you've taken to train us, to share your knowledge and to share your expertise. And I'm sure that we're going to continue your work in the future.
I wish you success in your teaching. Hopefully what you've learned and what you've accomplished is going to keep giving you ideas for the future. Hopefully you will maintain the connections with your colleagues. Congratulations, it was fantastic.
So thank you so much, Gosha. And as is typical of Gosha, she's actually teaching right now and she wasn't able to join us, but I will make sure that we save all of those wonderful, heartfelt messages in the chat to share with her. I know they'll mean a lot to her. So thank you, Gosha, once again. And I also am a graduate of the UTDP, so it's meant a lot to me as well. We're now going to welcome our student panel. I'd ask them to turn on their cameras. Thank you. The chat will be available for you to ask questions. So we're going to start our panel by giving the students an opportunity to share with us their experiences of remote teaching and learning at Ryerson over the past year and their experiences of learning at Ryerson. And then we'll have some follow-up questions, and then we'll open it up to a nice discussion with all of us using the chat. Excuse me. In the chat, I ask that you make sure to address your comments to the panelists, at least if you want the panelists to see it, or to the panelists and attendees to make sure that we see the messages. All right, thank you. So first, I'd like to really welcome you and thank you so much for your time and your generosity in sharing your experiences with us. It's really exciting to hear from you, and I know you all represent not just your own experiences, but the voices of so many students across the campus. I'd like to start by asking you all to introduce yourselves. I suppose I should probably introduce myself too. I'll start with me. I'm Wendy Freeman. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching.
My name is David. I am actually going into my 7th year at Ryerson. I started off in computer science, realized I wanted to be in communications, and transferred, and now I'm going into my final year of professional communication.
My name is MJ Wright, and I just graduated. I finished my final year of Arts and Contemporary Studies in the Cultural Studies focus. Me and David worked on a project throughout the semester that I'm very excited to share with everyone when we get to that point.
Hi, everyone. Oh, no, Mia, you go ahead first. Hi, my name is Hiranniya. I just graduated from the Business Technology Management program here at Ryerson, and I had the privilege of working at the Academic Integrity Office for the past 2 years, so I'm excited to share my experiences from there. Thank you. Sorry, Nia. Hi, everyone. My name is Eileen, and I'm a 4th year undergrad in architectural science. And today I'm here to talk a little bit about the Peer Network program, which is a pilot program that launched in the fall of 2020 and is targeted towards students under the engineering and architectural science faculty. And one of the main objectives for the Peer Network program is to build a network of peer-to-peer connections to create a safe and accessible community where students can share their knowledge and resources.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daryll. I'm a master's student here at Ryerson in the Department of Psychology, doing the psychological science stream. And I'm here today, not just as a graduate student, but also as a bit of a representative of TAGAs. Over the past year, I've also had the pleasure of working with the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching as one of their graduate educational developers. And so we sort of help to train and facilitate the growth of our TAGAs, much like the UTDP. We have the GTDP, which is the Graduate Teaching Development Program. And so I'm just here today to bring a bit of that perspective to the conference as well.
Thank you all. And again, thank you all for joining us. So I'm going to start with you, David and MJ, and ask you to tell us a little bit about your project and about what the most impactful takeaways are from your initiative, which focused on understanding the learning experience with remote learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited to talk about it. So hopefully everyone can see the slides. As you can see, and as MJ kind of alluded to, we ran an initiative throughout the entirety of the winter 2021 semester, which was made up of 12 focus group sessions where we met bi-weekly with 2 different groups. So one week we would meet with 2nd and 3rd years, and then the next week we would meet with 4th plus years. We alternated between those 2 groups for the entire semester. And we also sent out 3 online surveys through all the sort of means through program administrators. If any of you are on the call, thank you for helping us send out the surveys, and through things like the RSU and the student societies. And we got somewhere around 350 responses through those online surveys. And the overall goal of the project was to just learn from students directly exactly what students are facing in the classroom, because there's a lot of different experiences from program to program, from community to community within Ryerson. So we wanted to get all of that down and hopefully learn from it. And that's why we're here, because we're really excited. We think that a lot of the things that students told us over the past semester are not only relevant, in the next, hopefully only one semester of online learning, but even beyond when we're past, being in a solely online environment. I think there's a lot of lessons that we've learned from our own experiences, but from listening to all these student experiences that we can bring forward. And if we go to the next slide, I think.
Yeah, so yeah, as David said, we met with the same groups of students throughout the semester. We really wanted to kind of get a chance to track the experience of a student throughout the whole period of online learning. And so alongside asking for impressions of specific programming and specific opportunities they've had at Ryerson and the way they're reacting to teaching strategies, we also just kind of wanted to see how they were doing throughout the time. And we wanted to kind of track what was the emotional progression of being an online student throughout the winter semester. And these were two quotes. I'm gonna read the quotes aloud that kind of summarize the mood throughout the sessions. They probably won't come as any surprise to any of you, as we're all living through the same pandemic. But the first quote we have is there's a student we spoke to who wanted to go to grad school but may not want to anymore. I'm really concerned about my motivation. With everything happening, it's really hard to keep your levels up. I usually like school and learning, but in this capacity, it's hard to stay afloat and level-headed. And then the second quote here is, I already feel burnt out starting this semester. I've never felt this way, to be honest. Like I usually come into a new semester ready to go, refreshed. You get tired throughout the semester, but you're not tired from day one. Unfortunately, the winter break didn't feel like much of a break this year with everything going on. And kind of these two quotes kind of summarize the continual mood we had throughout the sessions, that it's been tough. It's been tough for students, and I'm sure it's been tough for all of you. On top of the experience of shifting to the experience of online learning, there's so much tragedy in the world, and this kind of pervasive malaise didn't really shift throughout the semester. It didn't seem like things got easier between either semester and throughout the semester as well. And I think that's something that's important to address. Students are struggling, and it's possible that this struggle will continue as we move into the next semesters, whether that's online or off. There's going to be a lot of residue from this trauma we've all experienced. We can go on to the next slide.
So as MJ said, and something that we feel very strongly, but also we wanted to communicate to you that students in our breakout groups and in the surveys communicated this as well. We all know that faculty and staff are doing so much to support students during these times, often a lot more than you should be expected to. And so throughout this project, we didn't want to, focus on, that one professor who might be somehow putting in 50 hours a day, even though there's only 24 in a day, to really change the whole world, because that's amazing. And it's great to read those stories, but it's also not feasible to expect, every single person to be giving that much. So we really wanted to focus on some just really basic, things that don't require extra resources or extra energy or time or things like that from professors, but were very clearly shown to us through all these student interactions and surveys that it made a big difference for students. So one of those first ones was running consistent breakout groups with the same students throughout the entire semester, because students said that really helped them build community and connections during a time of otherwise complete, isolation from all their friends, and especially for first and second year students, people who their only opportunity to meet their friends on campus has been in an online environment. And so that means, there's obviously a little bit of technological knowledge that goes into that. And I believe the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching has really great Zoom workshops. But yeah, just really simple. Instead of having random breakout groups, every lecture, students said that they really enjoyed having the same breakout groups, where they were able to, those were friends that they could go back to and get support from. They were friends that they could ask questions to if they had to miss a lecture, all those kinds of things. And one of the second ones was actually making space for intentional stretch or walk breaks during class. So breaks already happen, during lectures. And I know from my personal experience, when we go on break, I sit in my chair and wait for the professor to come back. I might go to the washroom. But students said that when profs specifically said, this is your break, go for a walk around the block, or, get up, walk down your hallway in your, apartment building, whatever the walk you're able to do, I guess, or just doing stretches. That was a really good, even though it wasn't anything the professor actually did, like the professors didn't lead stretches or walks, but just like that specific reminder, like you should do this now, gave students that reminder and incentive to be a little more active.
A third thing that students talked about was there was professors who held polls at the beginning of classes to see, kind of just checking how students were doing, what their moods were like, what their levels were at, if they're experiencing anything extra on top of things. And even beyond that, might be too much for some people, depending on how big your classes are, to kind of pay attention to every student. But even just having regular communication with students via email is so appreciated, giving students updates as much as possible. Students are thirsting for connection right now. They really are longing for that impact, that one-on-one personal connection, even if that is just getting a response to an email that is within a couple of days. That is so appreciated, more than usual in a typical year. Fourth, specifically got called out in one of the big first courses we had, the Student Technology Survey, which was provided by the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching. That was kind of the survey to find out students' needs and accessibility restrictions that you could give out at the start of the year. That was so appreciated by the one student who mentioned that the professor used it, kind of making sure that all students were taken care of and that they were able to access content effectively in a way that will be, understood by them. And finding out about different time zones and all the different issues that might face students during these times. So using that survey that's very kindly provided by CELT, that was something that students really appreciated. And finally, students constantly throughout the semester talked about recording lectures and how appreciated it was. The students appreciated that they could come back to content afterwards, review content that they may have missed, and not have to contact professors to ask questions that they could just find out by reading the lectures again. That was something that was constantly came up, and also in terms of accessibility, and infinitely appreciated for students with disabilities, students who might be facing multiple jobs, students who are raising children of their own, who may not have time to come to class or pay attention, have all their attention on class online. Recording lectures was infinitely beneficial for these students. And that's something that can continue as we move on to offline learning again. You can go to the next slide.
And so we also know that, we've said quite a few things there. I believe one of the people from CELT is going to put a link in the chat. We've made a sort of like fact sheet that summarizes a lot of our findings. Awesome. Thank you, Andrea. And we also broke it down into just a quick, remember the 3 C's: community, communication, and compassion. So community, especially right now, there are plenty of ways to build community within the classroom, and students really appreciate it when that does happen. Communication, students are always more appreciative and look forward to having more dialogue and more opportunities to engage with their professors and the people they're learning from. And compassion. MJ hit on this, but a lot of these problems that we're talking about, were really prominent during the pandemic, but a lot of these issues, will continue for many students that are in our classes. For example, there's been times where I'm in classes and I have 3 jobs before the pandemic, and sometimes it's just not feasible for me. Like I need to, pay the bills and I have to miss a class. And so a lot of these things really come back to compassion. And that was the single most thing that made a difference for students this year was when profs showed compassion. And we also know that there's a lot of things that go into compassion. Being compassionate requires, professors having enough support and resources. And so all of that is important as well. But yeah, it's just to show that you don't have to go super, super far. You don't need to spend $1 million on your course to make students feel like they're being supported. And just really quickly, yes, we do hope to have more full publishing of things coming soon.
Thank you, David and MJ. That's so much rich information to carry us forward. I'd like to move now to Nia. And Nia will share with us her experience both as someone who works with faculty and as well as student. So Nia, how can teachers and students both communicate in understanding the weight of each other's roles?
Yes, thank you, Wendy, for the question. And just to kind of give a background beforehand, in the 4 years that I've been at Ryerson, I've had the opportunity to work through a lot of the career boost roles behind the scenes with faculty and administration, and also through a lot of student societies. I've worked directly with students. And the role as an outreach assistant at the Academic Integrity Office kind of combined both. So I was able to work with both faculty and the students. And one of the conversations that I'm consistently having with my, whether it be my friends or fellow classmates, is that they don't feel like they're being understood by the professors, or they don't feel that they understand how much the professors are going through. And I think that's not just a pandemic problem, it's been a long-standing problem. So in my role as the outreach assistant, one of the events that I got to host was Sipping with Integrity, where it's just a really casual event where faculty and students would just sit and have an open and honest conversation about whatever they wanted to have. One of the questions that we even got to ask the faculty was, have you ever plagiarized when you were going through post-secondary education, and what were your experiences like? And when some of the faculty actually answered, yeah, or they almost did it, you kind of got to see the really human side of professors, as they say. Because from the students' perspectives, a lot of us see our professors as, oh my God, they're doing all these curriculums, they have everything set, they have all these course plans set, they're really smart. But none of us see the fact that, they also have family struggles at home. This pandemic has affected them just as much as it has affected the students. So when we had the conversation, some of the feedback we got was, thank you. This really helped understand my professor's view, the weight of their roles, how much preparation they put into each of the lectures and things like that. So having more of these conversations throughout the year, whether we're still in the online learning phase or we're offline, I think it really helps students and professors understand each other and the weight of each other's roles. Especially a lot of what MJ and David said really resonated with me, because there have been days where I wasn't able to financially afford to go to school, but there were no recordings at the time. But I could just ask some of my friends, hey, what did I miss in class? But in the online learning, I don't know who any of the people are, so I'm just like left stranded. So the recordings really help. So just essentially understanding that we're both on opposite sides of the same coin, just trying to pursue education to its fullest capability. And if that statement is understood by both parties, I think that's the easiest way to go forward.
Thank you, Nia. Moving on to Eileen. So Eileen, you also have another perspective to share with us, working with students. Can you talk a little bit about how to build community across programs between students and outside of the classroom?
Thank you, Wendy. Well, as one of the 7 peer facilitators in the Peer Network program, one of my main responsibilities was to act as this connector or professors or professionals or experts that we invited in and help them to understand really the needs of the students. So when we are curating the content for workshops, where we call them master classes, we're bringing in our own perspectives as students within those departments. And that can come in the form of setting up meetings with these speakers to discuss what would the students want to learn from them, and do all of that kind of preparation one-to-one with the speaker before we deliver the content to the students. And also when we're hosting or even presenting the master classes as peer facilitator, we're hopeful that students would look at our role and see that they also have the capacity to be in our positions as well. And this kind of peer-to-peer format is not only in the peer facilitator's role, but also definitely in our advisors and connectors roles. So on the next slide, we have this chart showing the different roles that we have here. So as facilitators, we often work with a medium to a large group of students, delivering sessions and workshops that are more focused on skill set trainings. And we also have peer advisors who often do one-on-ones and small group sessions that are focused more on personal goal setting or action plans in any of the 5 curriculum hubs that we have here. So experiential learning, leadership, academic success, well-being, and career development. And as for the peer connectors, they're the ones who will pop up into the classrooms, make announcements on the upcoming events. And they're also the ones who are on social medias to increase the visibility of the program. And to bring it back to the question, I think we're really at the starting point of building a community, especially with so many programs that share the similar needs. I think for both engineering students and architecture students, we often feel we're quite isolated from the main campus. Most of the resources that we find from campus are usually very general. And for architecture and engineering students, a lot of times their academic needs are quite technical. So I think having this kind of student representations is really crucial in helping them to relate to their program culture. And by hiring students to train us to vocalize our needs, I think also helps to develop an empowering learning environment. So as for remote learning, the entire program really started on the idea of being fully virtual. So all of our master classes, one-on-one appointments, and peer chats were all designed to take advantage of online learning. For example, on the next slide, you can see we have this image of the online booking appointments for peer advisors. And that shows like a calendar for all the peer advisors availability. So to make it easier for students to access the booking times and resources. And as for immediate feedback that we receive from each post and pre-assessments for the peer chat and master classes, they have played a huge role in improving the way we engage students or even selecting our masterclass topics. So with the data we collected, we're able to quickly adjust our outreach strategies and presentation formats based on those immediate feedback. And we've seen that firsthand in the winter semester when our attendance and registration rate increased tremendously compared to our fall term. And we can see that kind of all the feedback and reflections that we have taken has shown its impact on the students as well. So overall, I think what I've learned in my experience as a peer facilitator, also as a student, and also trying to connect with professors and professionals and experts, I noticed that we really do need support from both ends, both from the students and the faculties. A lot of times there are a lot of difficulties to engage with students, especially in this kind of online environment where, as MJ and David has mentioned, a lot of students are burnt out. But we're really trying to find ways that we can engage with them either through having little breakout sessions like MJ and David has mentioned, or popping to classroom to have a little chat with the students to make them kind of feel excited that there is a support system outside the classrooms. And definitely we won't be able to do this without the support from the faculty as well.
Thanks, Eileen. That's really highlights the theme of this conference, Partners in Learning, and how faculty and students work together. Next, I'd like to invite Daryll to share with us his experience from the graduate student perspective with the question, how can graduate students help to be or create partners in learning?
Thank you so much for the question, Wendy. And I think graduate students are really perfectly situated to sort of act as a bridge between our faculty and our educational staff and the undergraduate students that they service. And so as graduate students, it's really important that we're able to recognize our, I guess, power or capacity in that role to be able to connect these two groups. And so my colleagues and those with me on the panel have already brilliantly touched on some of these points, in the sense that, Nia talked about how professors and students are kind of on two different sides of the same coin. We're all going through this pandemic. And I love something that Dr. Mahabali said yesterday. She said, we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And so what I like about the role of graduate students and GAs and TAs specifically is we have the opportunity to kind of connect those boats and allow people to understand each what the other is going through. It's also good because some students are intimidated by having to approach their professors. And Eileen also talked about advocating for students advocating for themselves. And that can be really tricky as it is in person, right? When you have an undergraduate student who is in the presence of this, Dr. So-and-so, who is this expert on this topic. And for many students, you can see how that dynamic becomes even exacerbated by being online, where you're not even able to speak face-to-face, and there are so many other factors that are out of your control. So having graduate students and graduate assistants act as that buffer between students is really empowering. And unfortunately, a lot of undergraduate students kind of see graduate students as sort of professors as well, and they have them up on this pedestal. I myself, I receive emails from students sometimes saying, dear Professor Daryll, and I always think to myself, while I'm flattered, not yet, too soon. And so working against that stigma and understanding that we can empower, as faculty, we can empower graduate students to really embrace this bridging role, and encouraging them to sort of work with their undergraduate students to realize that there is a much closer gap between undergrads and grads than undergrads would believe. And so it makes this advocacy for themselves very possible. A couple of things I just wanted to quickly touch on as well is it's really important to recognize that, through the GTDP program, a lot of acronyms, I have the privilege of working with a lot of TAs and GAs, and it's important that we remember that these TAs and GAs are very, very likely to be the professors and the educators of the future. And while not every single one of these GAs is going to go on to a job in academia, it's very likely that anybody who gets a job in academia will have likely had this TAGA experience. And so this year in the CELT, we've been able to focus on sort of one of the workshops that we offered, for example, was on course design, teaching these GAs what the skills they're going to need to be able to run a classroom. And I bring that up just to sort of refer back to what David and MJ talked about in a lot of those techniques that professors can employ. Having graduate students sort of understand some of those techniques, and they can use them as well in their own labs, in their own tutorials, in their own sessions, is so crucial. The check-ins, for example, I've had the opportunity to check in with some of my students this year. Whenever I ran like a tutorial, I would start by asking them, how are you, right? Or what's going on? How are you doing in this online learning thing? And much like David and MJ, that desire for connection and conversation was palpable, right? There are times where we would spend several minutes just talking about, transportation to and from school and their future sort of career path. And so those are all excellent techniques. I just wanted to add one. I was encouraged to share a little bit of my research here, and I don't think I would be a very good grad student if I didn't find a way to slide my own research in there somehow. But this is a slide that's taken right from one of my projects called the Pedagogy Project. And basically it talks about this thing called the pause procedure. And again, just like the breaks that were sort of mentioned, where students can get up and get active, there is research that has shown that taking reflection breaks as well during the lecture. So instead of having that one break where students just kind of are at free for all, giving students the opportunity to pause during the lecture and discuss with one another the content to that point really actually helps to solidify the learning. It also allows them to sort of reset. We all know in psychology, it's sort of well established that attention is a finite resource, right? And so you got to give people the chance to sort of re-engage. And the pause procedure is one of the ways that you can do that. So my research will be testing providing more support to this idea and seeing if we can really incorporate it in a meaningful way into our typical undergraduate lectures. And so just to add like a couple of takeaways, the first is, I think as faculty, we are really, really able, and by we, I mean you all, because again, not there yet, but I think faculty are really in a position where it's important to help TAs and GAs understand their role and the capacity that they have to be able to bridge this gap between faculty and students, especially during this online learning pandemic. I was fortunate to work with a professor who recognized just that. And usually, instead of being able to introduce myself to the class in person, he supported me in creating like an intro video where I was able to just kind of talk about myself and content to students. And I received a couple of emails from students who were really grateful for that opportunity to be able to get to know the person on the other side of this email address that is in the syllabus. The second takeaway would be don't be afraid to encourage and empower students to do this, much like sort of playing off that first takeaway. As the professors in the classrooms, you have the power to really shape what goes on. And just like what some of my colleagues were saying, when TAs and GAs really have your support and really understand that you're looking for them to build these bridges and to facilitate these connections, it really helps make it easier. And it also allows you to sort of be brought into that conversation where we can figure out together, okay, what's the best way to reach these students? What's the best way to make them feel as though we are here for them, we are supporting them. And even if they're maybe a little intimidated by the professor's role still, they might be able to find more of a resource in their TA and GA.
Thank you, Daryll. The next, what I'd like to do is before we turn it over to Q&A, ask each of you to think about one question, and we'll take it in the same order in which we started. What did you like most about remote learning that was previously lacking? So we'll start with David and MJ.
Yeah, I think for me, as I said, I've been a traditionally overworked student, and really the recordings of lectures changed learning for me because it wasn't, kind of the end of the world if I wasn't able to make a lecture. And I know that comes with a lot of questions about, academic integrity, academic freedom, and all those concerns that come up for professors. And I think though that there's ways that those can be handled. And I just want to get through to students don't want, recorded lectures so that we can, kind of ignore everything and, be lazy or whatever. It's really like when I have a recorded lecture, I'll watch it 2 or 3 times. And that's something that we learn from students. And so I think that's an example of, the pandemic, forced us to record lectures. It put us online. And I think though that it provides us with moving forward. So many things have changed about how education works. 30 years ago, I know whenever I hear from my mom, she didn't even have to have a summer job to pay for her education. Whereas, some of us have to have 2 or 3 jobs during actual fall and winter semester to pay for education, pay for housing, food, all of those things. And also just, enjoying our life. That's important too. So I do think that for sure, recorded lectures, and as Heather's pointing out in the chat as well, absolutely for students with disabilities, it makes, the world of difference, being able to have that accessibility as a default, as opposed to something you have to seek out. So I really think that for me has been something that I've really enjoyed about the online learning experience.
I think the thing I've enjoyed most about online learning that was previously lacking, I think the context of online learning and the context of the pandemic, obviously we're all more isolated from our friends and our communities than ever before. And that's a constant truth in every aspect of our lives right now. But something I do think that I have enjoyed is the opportunities to kind of counter that in new, innovative ways using online platforms. I think there are so many opportunities right now for community building and to create spaces for students and people outside of the university as well, to just be and to connect with one another in a way that may not have been possible before, especially due to Ryerson as a commuting organization, a commuting reputation that Ryerson has as a commuter school. A lot of students in the past would not have been able to go to events that they now can go to comfortably from their own bed. I know I've definitely attended events from my bed recently, and I would not have gone to those events otherwise if that was not the case, if I didn't have that opportunity. So I think that that kind of potential for for community building in spaces. I think our sessions are a great example of that. We, not to toot our own horns about the events we ran this year, but we were asking about one time about like what has been a support, what's been kind of a source of support for you during the semester, what's been something that's helping you get by, and the student said that the sessions, being able to just kind of meet with us and a couple other students, was something that really, you know, sort of helped them get through their day and allowed them the space to vent. And I think that's something that professors can also be a part of with, as we mentioned, creating breakout rooms with a consistent group of students that kind of allows them to have that community throughout the semester in the same way they may have gathered if they were in that class with people. Potentially not, but I think creating opportunities for that is really important. And there are so many ways to do it now using the online platforms.
I guess I could go next. Yeah, in terms of mental health as well, the online learning has been a huge help, especially when you think about, like, personally from my experience, when there is a mental health struggle, it's so much harder to wake up and get dressed and go to school, per se. When, like MJ said, I've had the opportunity, even on my worst days, to just be able to access the lectures and recordings from the comfort of my bed. And that's something that I didn't even think was a possibility at one point, and you just have to kind of train yourself to be able to pick yourself up and go to school no matter what the struggle is. But this online learning has given an opportunity to even anyone, whether it be financial struggles, mental health struggles, whatever it is, you can be in a safe space that you call home, if you do have that, or whatever, the comfort of the place that you're in, and still be able to access education, which you might not have had the privilege to do so before. So that's one thing that I really appreciate about online learning.
And I think for me, I really enjoyed the flexibility that comes with online learning. And it doesn't need to be this divide of lectures, either be synchronous or be asynchronous. I think for what I found is one of the class I attended had this approach where it's mixed of both. So we'll have lectures that are recorded, and then we'll have discussions that we have in class. So I find that kind of mode where you're allowed to take your time with digesting all of the content from the lectures, and then come up with your questions that you have ahead of time before you jump into any sort of discussions with professors. And I find those kind of discussion times a lot more effective, because students who do participate are the ones who have listened to the lectures, will have questions prepared ahead of time, and those kind of discussions are a lot more impactful. And the time spent there might have been just an hour and a half, but I think compared to what we normally have, which is just a 3-hour lectures, listening to professors talk from the beginning to the end, I think this kind of mixed mode really helps students to learn better, because there's that kind of mental preparation time that they have. So I really enjoy that kind of flexibility.
So two things for me that I've really enjoyed about online learning during the pandemic. The first kind of builds off of what Eileen and others have said. So in the graduate, the GTDP, I'm so sorry, program, and as well as in the CLT 101 course, or 100, sorry, course, one of the things that we talk about is an active learning strategy called flipped classrooms, which is very similar to what's been described, where basically instead of using class time for lecturing and actually conferring information, you would pre-record and provide resources, not just textbook readings, but like pre-recorded lectures or videos where students could familiarize themselves with the majority of the content before the class, and then class time is used for reinforcement and actual activities. So the types of things that students would usually do for homework or outside of classroom are done in the classroom. So things like class discussions, assignments, worksheets, that kind of thing. And so I found that with the pandemic, many professors and many educators just kind of naturally switched to a sort of flipped classroom model, where because they were pre-recording their lectures, they had the great idea of using the synchronous time to just engage with students and really clarify questions and things like that. And so I've always been a fan of the flipped classroom. One of the workshops that we just did talked about it a little bit. And I really hope that that's something that we can continue to employ post-pandemic when that time eventually comes. The second thing that I sort of enjoyed, it has been, again, the opportunity as a TA, GA to really engage more with students. I've because of my online, role, I guess, as a GA, I've been able to, develop, I've been able to work with students during workshops. I've been able to have one-on-one meetings with students, things that probably wouldn't have been able to do as well in person. And of course, it also frees up the students to be able to attend. I had, one student, for example, who was living in Brampton, so for her, and commuting, so for her to come to like an office hour on some, random day or evening would not really have been possible, but because of the online learning and environment, she was able to attend. So just that opportunity to really engage with students more and really take sort of our roles up a notch, I've enjoyed as well.
Thank you all for those really thoughtful contributions. What really comes through for me is the importance of students and faculty knowing each other and learning to get to know each other as humans, as one of you said. And also the importance and value of flexibility for equity, for access. These are lessons that I hope we can take into the future. So I have questions, but I'm going to turn to our audience questions. So the first question we have is for David and MJ. Were there any trends about platforms that students have used with profs that they really liked, found useful? Examples: Slack, Discord, WhatsApp?
So yes and no. The reason I said looking forward to answering this in the Q&A is because it has some nuance to it. It depends what the purpose was. Students had different opinions. If it was going to be a platform that the professor was going to be a part of, I think the trend was more the formal platforms, like professors who were using something like Slack or Microsoft Teams. That seems to be more what students were looking for. They didn't necessarily want like a WhatsApp chat with their professor. And I also assume professors probably don't want that. When it came to the, more casual, like student organized sides, it was kind of, however students wanted to set those up themselves. And one thing that really stood out when we asked students, we pretty much asked students that exact question in one of our focus groups. And one of the things that students talked a lot about was they do actually prefer, for a very specific reason, having a group with their professor. So doing it on Microsoft Teams or Slack or something like that, because a lot of students don't want to join the student set up WhatsApp group chats, because people will, even if one person in that group chat commits an academic integrity infraction, that whole group chat potentially can be in trouble because the answers for the test were sent to that whole group chat. So students actually, I was kind of surprised, but it was something that I hadn't really thought of, because my program can't really cheat in communication. There's no like right answer, right? So I think for maybe the more, math, science, kind of those sort of subjects, especially, students liked having, Slack. I think Discord students were like okay with, but I think Slack and Microsoft Teams, they enjoyed having those with the professors, because that meant people weren't going to, cheat in the group and then potentially get other people in trouble through association.
Is there anything other panelists would like to add to that? Thank you, David. Okay. We have a question in the chat to the panelists from Lester. If recorded lectures were available, were you ever tempted to skip class knowing you could always catch up later? Would this lead to lower student engagement and participation in flipped classrooms, live lectures? And the question isn't addressed to anyone in particular, but Daryll, maybe we could start with you, because this is a big concern often with flipped classrooms.
Definitely. So to speak for just a moment from my own personal experience, For sure, that temptation is there sometimes. I'm going to be very real with you, especially when when we're in person in the middle of the winter semester. There's big snowstorm outside. You don't want to leave, all that good stuff. But the reality is, many students still need that resource, and I think I posed a similar question to Dr. Mahabali yesterday, and she said something profound in the sense that she was like, if there are 1 or 2 students who take advantage of a particular resource that is helping dozens of other students, it's still worth it in the big picture. And so while you may have a few students who would now be incentivized not to come to class, there are still way more students who need and use that resource in a more genuine way. And B, from what I've seen in my experiences, both as a student and as a graduate assistant, it has never affected engagement levels to the point where you're now lecturing to an empty Zoom room or an empty lecture hall. There are always still a significant level of students who are engaged in that live lecture or that live talk. So. And then furthermore, this really allows students to grasp the material, so that even, let's say, an earlier lecture, if you're in a faculty where the content is sort of summative and builds on itself, being able to access those early lectures will increase engagement for later lectures when students have sort of had the opportunity to catch up and really digest what's been going on.
And if I can add on to that, one of the things that, like, I was one of the students that was absolutely tempted at the beginning to not go to lectures, but then I learned the hard way that it was really affecting my grades. And a lot of students go through that process because initially it's the excitement of, oh, you don't have to go to class and you can just watch the lectures later. But then you realize a lot of the content, even though you can watch the lectures, it's different from engaging with other students and actually listening to different perspectives and learning from that. So you kind of realize that, oh my God, you're missing out on that learning curve. And then you naturally get back into going back to the live lecture. So I think even if people at the initial stages are skipping, they will come to that realization that going to lectures live is actually better, and hopefully that kind of turns them around. So
with the benefit of knowing that you can use the recording later to study. Yeah. Thank you. There was a question that was addressed directly to the panelists from Sarah. Could you repeat the name of group messaging apps that are superior to WhatsApp groups? Slack was one, I believe. MJ, you offered Microsoft Teams, but that just went to the panelists. Did you want to talk a little bit about restate the messaging apps that you think are better than WhatsApp?
Yeah, what was mentioned by the students in our sessions were Slack and Microsoft Teams. Those were the two that came up.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. So Roberto asks, observations from classes I've taken. Some professors may think students who choose not to attend live lectures have lower quiz scores. What are your thoughts on that? And I think we've started to talk a little bit about that. What are your thoughts on that? And have your grades changed when you've attended live lectures? So any personal experiences? And Nia, I think you started to talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, initially, it was a very roller coaster of whether I attend the live or not attend, depending on how I was feeling that entire semester. But when I first started, I was attending all the lectures, and it really showed on my grade because you also connect with the professor. You were able to ask them questions afterwards, and you're more comfortable engaging in class, especially online with your peers, when you kind of started recognizing some of the faces that you see online. So it definitely did help with my grades. And then came a period where I was like, okay, well, I have the recordings. I don't want to participate. And I did see a decline in the grades. But just it's all about the fact that as long as you go back and you realize what the importance of the lectures are, and if you're willing to go back and participate in those live lectures, you can get, like, a lot of people feel that if they miss the first few weeks and they can't get back into it in the last few weeks, but it's not true. It's just the minute you make that choice to go back into the live lectures or make that connection with the prof or engage in the classroom, you will see that change, and it's never too late. So that's the one thing that I've noticed.
I also, is it okay if I add on as well, Wendy? I think also the thing that I've noticed for myself, I struggle with a couple mental illnesses. And so before, lectures are recorded and then after, what I think, something to keep in mind is instead of thinking it as, oh, is a student going to skip this class because the lecture is recorded? I think the question, the thing that I was sort of asking myself is, do I have to suffer through this live lecture when I'm having a really bad mental health day? Or do I have the freedom to take the time that I need to get better and tomorrow, rewatch that lecture? So, the question that was asked earlier about like, oh, did you choose to skip more lectures because they were recorded? Even though some people may answer yes to that, I think a lot of students may not, also put that directly towards like, that is sometimes self-care that's needed, especially like I'm pretty lucky communications. We don't have the same kind of schedule that, an engineer does, but I've seen engineering student schedules and I think that should be classified as abuse. It's so much to put on people. It is so hard. And so I think that sometimes, skipping a lecture, yes, they signed up for it and all of that, but at the same time, sometimes it's just what students need to be able to, get through that week or that day. And so having those recorded lectures gives students, that space. Like, yeah, choosing to skip the lecture because it's recorded might be a choice, but they might have chosen to skip it even if it wasn't recorded and then not be able to catch up, which I know is certainly something that I did, when we were in person. I also lived in residence, so I didn't even have the commuting. And sometimes, it was just, I was struggling with my mental health and I couldn't make it to lecture. And then I just missed out completely on whatever happened. And I was lucky that over this past year, that wasn't the case. I was able to catch up. So.
Just to quickly add on to what everyone else is saying, I think it might be helpful to think we're not really relying purely on the recorded lectures. I think having that kind of synchronous component is very crucial to allow students to know that it's not whatever that they learn from the lecture is not just on that alone, but having components where students and professors can engage better and to talk on a more in-depth subject becomes a lot more helpful than to just having those kind of lecture-based series where students are just sitting and listening the whole time. So I think having that kind of valuing recorded lecture that has this add-on component rather than seeing it as students are purely relying on that to succeed in the course is going to be a little bit more helpful.
Thank you, Eileen, and that that was certainly reiterated by Janie in the chat to panelists that they say if classes are being recorded, are students less inclined to ask questions during class or participate with their camera on, since others will be able to view them later on in the recording. I think recording a lecture part is fine, but classes have group exercises and discussions. Then I feel the recording makes the attendees uncomfortable. And I think I would add to that it's really good to think about the different things that happen in a classroom. As you're all suggesting, it's not just the professor that's talking, but also giving students an opportunity to interact, and in remote teaching, understanding when the camera can be on and can be off. I think we have time for one more question, and I lost it in the chat. Hang on, bear with me. Sushila says, thank you to all panelists. Do you think that you interacted more or had more meaningful interactions with your classmates online rather than face-to-face in the classroom? And you can just raise your hand and let me know which one of you would like to take that one first. Okay, so MJ and then Daryll.
I can speak to this a little bit. I would say nothing beats face-to-face interaction. You really can't top that. And it's unfortunate that we are limited to meeting online. So I would say likely not personally. I don't think I have interacted with more students during this time. I probably have met a lot fewer classmates during this time, but I do think there's the opportunity to maybe create interactions with students that potentially they would never have met each other otherwise, because there is this space of kind of forced breakout rooms that brings random students together. You think about the in-person classroom, you're very much where you sit every day. Those are the people around you who you communicate with. Your friends are, if you're in a class with friends made previously, those are the people you're going to meet. And I think kind of almost the randomness of online breakout rooms can maybe create opportunities for meaningful connections beyond those who you would normally interact with. I think that's an interesting thing to reflect on.
Yeah, definitely. I want to add to that, but one quick thing that I wanted to point out before I do so is it's important to recognize there is actually a significant difference between recording lectures and pre-recorded lectures. So like in the flipped classroom, that design makes use of pre-recorded lectures. So you would be, it does, I guess, play on a little bit more time for the professors. For example, I know my supervisor and a couple other professors, some of which spend hours, arranging their scripts and recording their lectures and adding transcripts and all that stuff. So a special thank you to to those who do that, and to those who can't, don't worry about it. It's not the end of the world. We appreciate you as well. But that's important to note. So in a pre-recorded lecture, there would be no like other students present and things like that. So you don't have to worry too much about confidentiality. And obviously, as faculty, you sort of have both options open to you. You can record the group lectures, or you can kind of pre-record. But I just wanted to point that out. In regards to classroom interaction, I totally agree with MJ. There is no real comparison to face-to-face. While online community building has been great, I think I speak for a lot of people when I say we'll take the in-person over the online any day. And especially, that goes especially for graduate students. So for our classes, as many of you know, graduate student classes are usually much smaller, like only maybe 15 to 30 students. And so we are very used to being a pretty intimate group. And of course, it's the same cohort. So you're seeing a lot of the same people. And just the other day, I was connecting with my, I guess, my colleagues, and we're like, oh my gosh, we miss each other. So for the for the online, it's great, but the face-to-face is definitely better in terms of connection and student interaction.
And just really quickly, 10 seconds. One thing that we did hear unanimously from students was they did want pre-recorded lectures, and they did not like the idea of interactive parts being recorded. So I know there was a question somewhere in the chat about that. That was students, I think, agree with profs on that. It's pre-recorded works great. And then the synchronous live stuff that's interactive doesn't need to be recorded. It is actually better not recorded.
Just to add on the question a little bit and shed like a different light too. I think as our architecture students, we often think in terms of spatially. I find that definitely face-to-face in-person lectures are a lot more engaging for myself personally. But then with the layouts of a lot of the lecture halls, if you have rows and rows of students, so a lot of times when you're looking at the professors, you're not really seeing other kind of interactions with other students. So when it comes to discussions, oftentimes I think for a lot of students, a lot more intimidating to raise hands and talk in class, but in kind of this virtual platform where if students have their camera on, you're able to see students almost, it's like you're sitting in a circle where you can see everyone's faces, you can see their reaction, their nodding and their responses. So I find that has this different perspective or different way of engaging that I think the physical classroom is lacking a little bit.
Thank you, Eileen. I think we're almost at time. There's a bit of discussion in the chat around which is better, recorded or pre-recorded lectures. It's a really interesting question. If anyone has a quick response to that.
I wish there was a quick response to that. It's so complicated, and that's been the hardest thing about us compiling our data from all we heard from students is it's so nuanced. Like in certain cases, one's better. In a lot of cases, other ones are better. But generally, it boiled down to students agreed that when doing something interactive, having it live and not recorded was the preference. And when it came to, the traditional lecturing, students liked that pre-recorded because it kind of got it over as quick as possible. Professors can deliver it to them quickly and they can refer back to it later. But I say that with a lot of asterisks after that because it's more complicated.
Yeah, just to add to that very briefly, it's a great question. And I think when considering that question, any educator should ask themselves, you want to consider a few things. So one, what resources do you have available to you? The biggest of which would probably be time. As I said, pre-recording, I've seen the other side, and I know pre-recording can take a lot of time, a lot of organization. And so if you simply don't have that time, then maybe it's just best to record the lectures. And then also considering your class and your subject matter. So is this a more discussion-based class? Is this something where you're going to be having a lot of student input and things like that? If the answer is yes, then it might be a better idea to pre-record your lectures to avoid some of those confidentiality issues and things like that. So I think when you just have to sort of consider where you are and what's available to you in terms of resources, what you're trying to accomplish and what your subject matter is as a professor.
Thank you. And if I may put a plug in for the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching, we'd be very happy to talk to people, faculty, instructors about those kinds of decisions anytime. So thank you very much. We're just slightly over time. I will say that our panelists have agreed to join the water cooler session that directly follows this. You can leave this link and go to the next link in the schedule and continue this discussion for the next 15 minutes. I want to draw your attention to all the concurrent sessions. There's a rebirth teaching hour-long workshop at 1 o'clock that I hope some of you can attend, and the debrief. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our ASL interpreters and our live media captioner, and to thank all of you for sharing your experiences with us today. It's been a wonderful, eye-opening panel. Thank you very much.